Hello, my name is Janna Lundström. I am the author of the best-selling book Master the Coverstitch Machine, and in today's video I want to share my top tips for successful cover stitching, because let's be honest, while this is a wonderful machine to have, it does come with a bit of a learning curve and, well, some challenges sometimes, which is why I've made this video, because I have collected all my favorite tips that are very easy to do but will make a massive difference in the process. So without further ado, let's start with the tips. My number one tip is to fold the seam allowance in opposite direction as much as possible, because this will improve the feeding and keep the presser foot level, which will help prevent skip stitches a lot. And there are a couple of different ways you can do this. Either very carefully clip a small notch where the hem is going to be folded at, but make sure you don't break the seam. A tiny cut is enough. Then flip the clipped seam allowance in opposite direction and finish off by folding up the seam allowance. If you don't want to clip into the seam, you can also try this method. Finger press the seam allowance in opposite direction, again at the folding line, fold over the hem and check that the aligns with the press fold area. Otherwise you need to open up the fold again, adjust and fold up. And you can also try to flatten out the seams using a rubber mallet. This is actually surprisingly effective. Just hammer down the seams on a sturdy surface and you will be surprised how effective this is. During hemming, try using a hump jumper when you're sewing over uneven area, because this nifty tool will keep the presser foot level and prevent skip stitches. And if you're curious about this tool, go over to the description section where I have more information on where to get this hump jumper tool. To help with feeding, start by increasing the differential feed slightly, and you can also increase the stitch length a bit as well for an even greater effect. Just remember to revert back to the original settings once you've conquered the bump, so to speak. Sometimes increasing the stitch length in general can also help. I personally found that if I go below 2 on my cover stitch machine, it's much more prone to start skipping stitches. So just cranking it up to closer to 3, that will often fix that particular issue. Are you having problems such as skip stitches, uneven feeding or tension issues? Then I recommend that you download my free cover stitch troubleshooting guide. Links to that guide is of course in the description section. It can be so tempting to help the fabric feed through the machine, but do resist that temptation because it will cause all kinds of troubles, including skip stitches. Instead, gently guide the fabric with your hands, slow and control, and let the machine do the work. The right presser foot pressure will also improve the stitching quality. A general guide is that a thinner fabric usually requires less pressure and a thicker fabric will often need a higher presser foot pressure. However, sometimes the opposite might be true depending on factors such as the surface of the fabric and your other settings. So be prepared to experiment and see what works best for your particular project. Do try to stick to reputable brands that are known for producing high quality thread and needles, because this is not an area where you should go for the generic cheap stuff, in my humble opinion. Make sure that there are no tangled threads that prevent the stitches from forming properly. And this can happen in several places on the machine. And of course, double check that the threading is done correctly, because on some machines this can actually be a bit tricky. So it's always a good thing to check before you start sewing. I recommend that you always start sewing at the back of the garment just after the side seam, because that way you will set your machine off to a good start because you are sewing on a flat surface. If you're starting on the seam, well, it might be a little bit bumpy and the seam might have some feeding issues. So I do recommend that you start just after the seam on the back piece. So I hope that you found some of the tips useful in this video. As I said, it's very important to be open to experimentation. Try to see what works for you, and remember that every project will require some tweaking because different fabrics different thread types, lots of different factors will influence how you set up your cover stitch machine. So that's what I also want to encourage you. Be brave, be curious, and don't be afraid to experiment. Of course, also check out my free cover stitch troubleshooting guide, where you get even more tips on how to troubleshoot and fix common cover stitch issue. Thank you so much for watching. Stitch safe, and I'll talk to you soon.